It's World Kindness Day, a reminder that in a world often defined by division and noise, kindness still matters. Not the performative kind, but the real kind, the one that shows up in everyday choices, how we speak, how we listen, how we treat one another. But today's kindness conversation also meets a moment of justice. The Nigerian Senate has passed a bill approving jail time for anyone found guilty of sexual harassment in schools, a critical step towards protecting students and restoring safety to the spaces where they should feel most secure. It's a stark contrast, but also a powerful connection. Both acts, kindness and accountability, are about dignity, about choosing humanity in the way we live and lead. So what does kindness look like in a society that's still fighting to protect its most vulnerable? And how do those laws, empathy, and everyday action come together to build a culture where respect is the norm, not the exception? It's Jasiri, and today we're talking compassion in words, in policy, and in practice.
So first up on the agenda, as Tolu said, today is World Kindness Day, which is an international observance set aside to promote the importance of being kind to others, to oneself, and of course, to the world. It's celebrated annually on November the 13th, and it was introduced in 1998 by the World Kindness Movement, which encourages acts of kindness, both big and small, to foster empathy.
That's right. Kindness is such a simple word that carries so much power in a world where stress, struggle, and survival often take center stage. Do Nigerians still take time to show kindness to one another? To mark World Kindness Day, we headed to the streets and asked everyday Nigerians if they think we are still a kind people. My answer is no. So what's the kindest thing someone has ever done for them? And one small act of kindness they have shown someone else. This is just Siri on the streets. Let's roll the clip. Take a look.
Yes, Nigerians are kind people. If we are not kind, we will not be cannibals, eating one another. When you go to where people are not kind, you won't see inflows of people. Everybody is moving freely. Yes, Nigerians are kind people.
Some are kind, but not all of them.
Actually, Nigerians are very kind, even here and even outside the country. I have met Nigerians outside the country that I was stranded, and they really helped, even beyond what I can ever comprehend.
Well, not all, very few of them.
Based on the kindness, people misuse it, they misabuse it. Because when you be kind to some people, they will take advantage of it and they will not be, the response will not be nice to you.
There is a lot of kindness that people have done to me. Yes, people have paid my bills when I don't have. I have entered the transport and I don't have money to pay, and somebody assisted me to pay for me. Yes, people have given me accommodation when I have no one. I too is kind to people, and I have offered the same to people.
Recently, I traveled out of Lagos. I went to Ekiti, and I just met a lady on the street. I asked my way, and she was ready. She even followed me all throughout that day.
I show kindness even today while on the road. So just, it's not all about giving out, but sometimes you show what you want to the person.
Actually rescued me in terms of financial crisis sometimes.
I was inside bus, and then a woman sitting close to me, she mistakenly touched me with her hand, and my temperature was high, and she was like, "Hope you're fine." I said, "No, I'm just feeling headache." And she instantly transferred 5,000 naira to me that she said I should go look for proper treatment. I'm a nurse, so sometimes patients come to the hospital and they can't afford hospital bills, so I tend to use for my salary for them, but not all patients, but most patients.
Showing love. Immediately you love somebody, you have shown kindness.
Do unto others as you want others to do to you. I think that's the slogan. So I make sure, in fact, it's one of it now. You stopped me, I don't know what you wanted to ask, but I know you needed help. So since someone is doing it for me, I feel if anybody stopped me on the road, they might need help. So first of all, I will wait to listen, to hear what you want to say. If it's in my ability or my capacity to do it, why not? I will do it.
Not despair, but at least act of love, let me put it that way. Because if you love one another, you can go extra mile. Not affectionate, but at least you are being caring, act of love, and you pass it on.
I feel Nigerians should always look at those needy people are really suffering, so I will show kindness to them. They really need kindness.
I've helped some people by accommodating them in my environment. I accommodate them when there's finally like guys that need help. I can be kind to them by accommodating them, being stranded. Every kindness, because the one, as an average Nigerian, you're supposed to have a kindness that when your second is somehow stranded or need a help at that moment, you have to be kind to him because you don't know what he's going through.
So Judith, even before we watched this, Judith said she does not think Nigerians are kind. And I disagree with you. And I understand. Yeah. I see a lot of wickedness and lack of empathy in us, but I also see kindness. I've seen so many, in recent weeks, I know one of our friends, Adenike, has been sharing a number of people who need surgery. People are looking for 15, 20 millions. Nigerians have raised this money time and time again. We see how Nigerians donate. And I just think it's because we are in a society that a society and a situation that almost pushes you sometimes to be wicked. Because even in the sense of kindness we show, Nigerians still take advantage of that. And they now become entitled. So the next person who comes to you that normally you would have been kind to, guess what? You're a bit more restricted because Nigerians or a Nigerian has shown you pepe. I think it's a balance. I think we're still very kind and generous people. Look at that situation where the girl was burning up in the bus. Somebody who doesn't know you just gave you 5,000 naira. It's her little way of helping. So overall, I think we're still kind, but I think sometimes this is a situation of our circumstances are affecting our empathy and our ability to be kind. See how she's not sold on it. See how she's doing her face.
I actually think Nigerians are kind.
No, look, I think that when we're saying kindness, right?
I'm interested to know, both of you have said you think Nigerians are kind. Sorry, darling, I didn't take it from your mouth. But I'd like to know the percentage. It's tilting in whose favor?
Can I give you a percentage?
Yeah, you were saying.
No, so so how do I put this in a way that is? I've seen the ugliness and the soft ugly underbelly of our society. Maybe because of the position that I am in terms of radio and television and watching human relation, right, and just watching how things play out. If the true test of kindness in our society should be played at the highest level. So a society, and when I mean the highest level, I mean the government, organizations, agencies, departments. The way your civil service deals with certain people, the way it is very clear that they're not kind. The way our politicians and our senators, they deal with, humans, their constituents, is very clear that we're not kind. Yeah. So I think that the kindness itself is at the grassroots level, saying that, now all of us are together. Oh. But the true test of kindness is at that high level where it's meted down. Your kindness, the kindness is always very in your community, if the person speaks the same language as you, if they're in the same religion as you, or they go to the same church as you. I think I've not seen many charity drive, any charity driven things by mega churches. I have not seen it. I'm yet to see it. I have not seen it. When I say charity drive, instead of experience another year, how about you use that money and go to every society or the IDP camps? So that's kindness, in my opinion. No.
But I think you leave out how the little drops of kindness from individuals can create a big ocean. We can have the conversation about churches all day because I'm with you. I grew up in the church. My Reverend Doctor. I know some things about the church. But I think this is more about focusing on the little drops, the little actions each and every single one of us can take on a daily that can add to a blanket
I actually
of kindness.
think that Nigerians are very kind people because
we were recently rated second or third most generous people in the world.
Everywhere I have seen Nigerians, even when I see the interactions that we have with foreigners, one of the things I keep hearing that, we're very hospitable, we're very nice, we're very kind. I think it's individual experiences that shaping how people move forward, going forward, any act that they have done. I have seen people go out of their way for people that they absolutely know nothing about. I have seen someone that saw a person on the road and actually just asked, what's your problem? Why are you sitting here? Said, I have no job. I'm in Lagos for the first time. He didn't know who she was. Took her home, accommodated her, fed her, looked for a job for her, and set her on their way.
Right.
My mother.
Yeah, no, to me, I still believe
my
that
mother would say,
it
don't
has
know
to do
where
with
they
language and like if the person speaks the same language as you automatically, or they look certain way. That's how I see it. I mean, a small act of kindness always comes with a tag, in my opinion. I'm not saying that people are not kind. I just feel like it comes with a tag. If that person looks, speaks your language, or
so you're more willing,
or
if you have things
present
in
in one way, you are inclined to help the person. In my opinion, that's how I see it.
I think Nigerians, I think I'm in agreement with everyone on the table. Nigerians are kind, yes. But there are also some times that because you have been treated, the entitlement thing comes up, that thing of the ownership, I own you, I demand that you are kind to me. So when that happens, the next person that comes across, that you come across with, you are more restricted, you are more guarded. And then somehow when you're kind to somebody, you're expecting some form of gratification. Somebody,
but it's actually psychological. It's actually
these people to recognize that I've been kind to you.
So not necessarily recognize. It's actually psychological. So they say that when you do an act of kindness, it releases hormones like oxytocin that help you feel warm and fuzzy. So every time you do something kind, it makes you, it's not like you're chasing your high, but it makes you feel good. So it's not necessarily and I hope for many people, I know there are situations where kindness is transactional. You're hoping,
for a lot of
people, you're watering it for a future purpose.
In the era of social media where kindness is now televised, it has a funny undertone to it. The first time where the Bible will say something like, do something with your right hand, don't let your left hand. And now social media, you are feeding people, you are accommodating them, everything is televised. In fact, they are even you even give them a microphone to speak. And so you're like, okay, what are you really doing it for? And somehow it's now more like, what's your heart posture towards what you're doing? If you're doing it out of a good place where you just want more people to know.
Well, the ones that will remind you about that small act of kindness they've done for you for the rest of their life. At this point, they want you to grovel on the floor.
I know some people like that. Once they do you a kindness, they will take a chair and sit back.
So let me give the details. I was right. So according to the World Giving Report 2025, Nigeria was ranked the most generous country in the world. We're actually supposed to talk about it. I forgot.
I really do.
In 2024, 89% of Nigerians donated money and gave an average of 2.83% of their income, both of which were the highest rates globally. Additionally, Nigerians volunteered approximately 13.5 hours per person, surpassing the global average of 9 hours. Please, what did we volunteer for? But anyway, highest donation rate, 89%, highest share of income, giving more of their income, strong volunteerism, and cultural influences. The report points to strong cultural and social values, including religious faith and community norms as a driving force behind this generosity.
I agree, because outside the country, Nigerians are generous. You're willing to help. You're kind to people outside. In as much as now, like we say, the abuse and the entitlement has made people be very wary. Because now there are some people, you go abroad and you don't want to interact with Nigerians. You say, hey, I don't want me to use my head. So it's I don't know, man. It's
okay, before we go further, what's the kindest thing somebody has done for any of you guys? Or what's the kindest thing you think you've also done for someone?
I don't know about
I do kindness all the time.
I don't know about the kindest thing I've ever done for someone, but I do know, I think my father always shares a story. It was far back in 1999 or 1998. The day was eve of Christmas, and my dad was coming back from work, and some guys came in with bikes, and they were with guns. And so they started shooting in the air, and they were targeting my father, which is clear because he was just coming out from work. And they know that the place he worked at the end of every year, they would share, the profits. And so they were And so my dad ran into some place. He said there was bush there and he was hiding. And then some woman just came with something on her head. She dropped it down because she didn't know what happened. She just dropped it down, retied her up, and put it back up. And she saw my dad. It's like, okay, you fall? And my dad goes, no. So she's like, my dad is very tall. So if she puts it on her head, it's almost the same height as him, right? But she's also a large woman. So she doesn't know what's going on. And my dad just starts walking next to her. But he's bleeding off his shirt, right? Because the grace passes. So he's bleeding off his shirt. She's like, and then she kept asking, what happened? Says he fell. So, okay. So my dad is right next to her, just working with her, like just talking to her, so they don't see him, right?
And he's just alone,
until he gets out into a busy road.
Yeah.
And that's how he went home. that woman doesn't know that what she did to
Saved
him
his life.
saved his life. Because my dad kept saying that he was gone, that the bleeding was too much, that he was just like, he just lying down there, that he was gone. But the woman kept saying, and he just said, I slipped and fall. He said, sorry, follow me, let's go. So she's with it on the head, very massive load. And he's just right next to her, working very slowly with her and trying not to fall until she was able to get help.
And I think we see we do it sometimes and we don't even know. It's how the other person receives it. We have to go on a break.
Yes, let's go on a break anyway. 14 years behind bars. That's the sentence for sexual harassment in schools. But can punishment alone change a culture that's protected predators for decades? This new law promises accountability, but laws don't enforce themselves. After the break, we'll talk the new bill that aims to kick sexual harassment out of our schools. Stay with us.
For too long, sexual harassment in Nigeria's schools has lived in the shadows, whispered about in hallways, dismissed in staff rooms, and endured in silence by students who had no one to believe them. Today, that silence is being challenged. The Nigerian Senate has approved a landmark piece of legislation, the Sexual Harassment of Students Prevention and Prohibition Bill 2025. Under this new law, anyone found guilty of sexually harassing a student faces a minimum of 5 years and up to 14 years in prison with no option of a fine. It also removes one of the most harmful defenses, that a victim consented, because consent can never exist where power is abused. The bill is aimed at cleaning up a system that for too long has allowed predators to hide behind their titles. Teachers, lecturers, supervisors, people who were supposed to guide and protect, but instead exploited and intimidated. But even as this new bill sparks celebration, it also raises urgent questions. Will it truly change things on the ground? Will students finally feel safe enough to speak up? And will schools and law enforcement take these cases seriously? Or will this become another law that looks good on paper but dies in silence? And what of harassment that happens outside of schools? Joining us now is Omowumi Ogunrotimi. She's the Executive Director, Gender Mobile Initiative. Omowumi, welcome to Jasiri. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute delight to be here.
Fantastic. Let's get started.
All right, Mommy, so the passage of this bill marks a turning point in Nigeria's efforts to confront sexual harassment in learning spaces, yes. And for decades, students, particularly young women, have faced predatory behavior from those meant to mentor them. Why did you feel this bill was necessary now, and how does it differ from previous attempts to address sexual harassment in schools?
Thank you very much for that question. I would say that this bill is a revolutionary piece of legislation when passed into law, because it bridges or it fills the existing structural and institutional gaps that are existent in existing legislations. A lot of questions have come up in the last 2 weeks since this bill was passed by the Senate. You know, going by the fact that we have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, we have the Criminal Code as obtainable in the South and the Penal Code as obtainable in the North. But the fact remains that this is the first Nigerian piece of legislation when passed into law that is context-specific and sector-specific. It acknowledges the fact that sexual harassment happens within the context of unequal power relations. It also looks at the entire dimensions or manifestations of sexual harassment. We have a bill that also establishes sexual harassment as a crime and a civil wrong. We also have a bill that establishes sexual harassment as a strict liability offense, which means that consent is not going to be a defense, to patterns of sexual harassment or harassing behavioral patterns. We also have a bill that establishes sexual harassment as a vicarious liability offense. Oftentimes, the culture of sexual harassment has permeated the life and everyday practices in learning environments because of the dearth of accountability mechanisms and because of the culture of impunity. Because again, we know that culture is really, really strong. It's an integral part of prevention and response efforts. Because over the years, research has shown that sexual harassment thrives in environments also permeated by, the repressive culture of silence. Because people are scared to talk about sexual harassment. They're scared to report cases because of the long-standing, demonstration of institutional complacency, which sort of stifles the voices of survivors or even bystanders when they witness sexual harassment. So for one, I as a person, I'm really excited about the promise that this bill holds, to transform the cultural landscape of learning environments. And I think more importantly is the promise that this bill holds in also imposing responsibility on the administrative head. Sometimes when cases are reported, there is some level of institutional neglect and cover-up. But with this bill, coming up, institutional heads now have the responsibility to ensure that people come forward to report, are protected, and also to allocate resources to the implementation of this policy. So it demonstrates a lot of promise, and I'm really looking forward to the time when this bill will be assented to, and civil society organizations and other critical stakeholders can rally around to ensure that we move from policy to practice.
Right. In this bill, there's some significant change, and one of them is it's removing consent as a defense. And I do have to ask how significant this change will mean from a gender justice perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. So at the moment, we have higher education institutions with anti-sexual harassment policy. And in the process of supporting tertiary institutions to develop their policy, educators are always keen on, ensuring that when it has to do with consensual relationship, students and educators are given the allowance to express themselves. But we know for a fact that sexual harassment, thrives a lot within the context of significant power differentials, because higher education institutions are trailed by power hierarchy. And what we see is instances of power isolation where people are not held to account. So if we have a clause where consent is no longer, a ground for sexual harassment or a defense for sexual harassment, it definitely will transform the culture in learning environments. The second thing also is that we know that sometimes students or victims consent to this because there are consequences for saying no. So when someone says yes because there are consequences for saying no, that is not consent, because consent should be freely given. Consent should be enthusiastic. And for us as an organization, we're really big on preventative education, where people need to understand the interplay of power and privilege and how it impacts on learners' capacity to give consent within the context of unequal power relations. And this bill is explicit about the elements of consent.
All right, thank you. Some say that this bill may cause a moral panic or even make, teachers afraid of mentoring students very closely, because most of the time the real question is balance. How do we balance protection with maintaining healthy academic relationships? Whether we like it or not, students will still have to relate with their lecturers, both male and female. So how are we going to draw that balance? Because if this is made into law, we still have that danger of false or fake accusation, and it might become rife now that they know that there is a law backing it up.
So I think the first point to note is that this bill seeks to preserve the sanctity of educator and learners relationship by establishing that educators have the fiduciary duty of authority, dependency, and trust. And if you look at this fiduciary duty, it has been legally defined by this bill. So I would say there is nothing to be scared of. We know for a fact that there's a thin line between win and oppression. But before now, of course, there have been instances of mentorship without students laying claim to, patterns of sexual harassment. But this bill also clearly defines what constitutes sexual harassment. As a matter of fact, sexual harassment, especially the one that has to do with hostile environment, has been normalized, and it has become a part of our everyday life, that students experience sexual harassment and they do not even know that it is sexual harassment. And I guess as civil society organizations, we have that onerous task to begin to do a lot of work on ensuring that there is definitional clarity in terms of what constitutes sexual harassment. So we know for a fact that when purpose is undefined, abuse is inevitable. So there has to be, a clear-cut balance between mentorship and exploitation. And we know for a fact that learners and educators, they have that, relationship of trust, dependency, and authority. And it's important that educators who are saddled or entrusted with shaping the minds of young learners do not exploit that relationship for sexual gains. Also, this bill further, defines in its interpretation section what fiduciary relationship of care, trust, dependency, and authority means, such that when this is breached, again, there are clear indications that this relationship has been breached. Of course, there might be instances of false allegation, but the bill also establishes that because one is not able to conclusively prove that sexual harassment has happened, is not, again, conclusive enough to mean that this is an allegation that is false or an allegation that was made with malice. So every case will be examined based on the circumstances and the context. And I think that the drafters of this bill, did this with caution and also, factoring in the unique circumstances and peculiarities of learning environments as spaces that we need to nurture minds that are experiencing innovation and mentorship and not exploitation. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be churning out, products that what they experience is silence, and they're not able to challenge the systems of accountability. So this bill is really big on that, ensuring that there is a clear line between blame and oppression, and that persons who also breach the fiduciary relationship of trust, authority, and dependency, face the necessary sanctions.
So, Omowumi, I hear you, and I am very impressed with about sort of the minutiae, the details that you're laying out as to what is in the bill. But there's also the reality on the ground. The classroom should be one of the safest spaces for young people, but for too many it has become a place of fear, silence, and manipulation. And so a lot of the onus of making this bill work is going to fall on institutions that have for too long ignored the issue. So how do we sort of suddenly expect them to become part of the solutions? We know that many schools have prioritized school reputation and even lecturer reputation over justice. So what can be done to ensure schools protect their students first, not their image? Because they're a large part of the success of this bill when it becomes law. And I said when, not if.
Absolutely. So it might interest you to know that in the last 4 years, I have worked at Gender Mobile Initiative, and in that capacity, I have supported, with my team members, of course, we have supported higher education institutions to put the relevant policies in place. And at the moment, we're in partnership with over 300 higher education institutions. And this is to say that it is not a clear case of 100% resistance on the part of institutions. That is not to say that there are not instances of institutional protectionism, right, where institutions prioritize the image and the reputation of their school over the safety of students. And then students have to choose between their degree and, their dignity. We've had instances like that. But just to mention that this bill also imposes on the institution the responsibility to allocate resources to the implementation of this bill, and also to ensure that the relevant enforcement and implementation structures are set up. I don't know if you're aware of the mandate of the ICPC, that is the Independent Corrupt Practice and Other Related Offences Commission, in ensuring that we diffuse power hierarchies in public institutions and even private institutions, and also that people do not abuse authority and power for sexual gains, especially in, spaces characterized by power asymmetry. So with all these existing structures, institutions would have no choice than to embrace this piece of legislation and ensure that the relevant structures are put in place. And they are also charged with the responsibility of allocating resources to sensitization and capacity strengthening of enforcement structures. At the moment, over 300 institutions in Nigeria have signed up to adopt anti-sexual harassment policies. And these policies already, embody the fundamental principles of this bill. So when this bill becomes law, these policies will then serve as an implementation pathway for the legal framework itself. So we're excited about the future, and we hope that other institutions that have been resistant to these progressive efforts would embrace it, because as a matter of responsibility, they would have no choice, than to ensure that they do the needful to move us from policy to practice.
All right, Mommy, we hear you. My question now will be like a follow-up to Tolu's question before. It's a straightforward question, actually. Do you believe that most institutions have the capacity or will to implement independent sexual harassment committees effectively? Because we know that there are some institutions where offenders are probably powerful and well-connected. How are we able to, or how will we be able to hold these institutions accountable when sometimes we know that these people, they know they're well-connected and they're powerful?
Thank you very much for that question. So there will be pockets of instances like that. There have been pockets of instances like that. In fact, where policies exist, cases are reported, and the institution is still complicit, and neglects the case just because they want to preserve their reputation. However, as a civil society organization, we're in partnership with agencies of government that also serve as checks to these institutions. I think the first starting point, which is a good starting point, is to have this framework in place. It doesn't necessarily mean that we would record progress automatically, but with the relevant political will. Of course, there's a place of political will and there's a place of capacity.
Yes.
There are institutions who have the requisite political will, but they lack the capacity to actually implement their existing laws. And there are institutions with capacity, but they lack the political will. And there are institutions with both. So it's a learning curve for civil society organizations and for accountability agencies like the ICPC to ensure that we find a balance and we put the necessary checks in place. It might also interest you to know that before the emergence of this legal framework, of course, there was a lot of resistance. It's been a decade-long journey. In 2016, in 2015 to 2019, during the 8th Assembly, this bill was introduced but met with stiff resistance. In 2019 to 2023, it was passed by the House of Reps and the Senate, but we couldn't secure presidential assent. And now we are back to that point, and we believe that this will be different this time around, that the president would exercise no executive objection to this bill. So there is some kind of progress. And I think that what is most important is that we are moving in the right direction. And we are hopeful that with every step on the way, it will get us closer to our vision of, having safe campuses where women and girls and even boys do not experience sexual harassment.
Okay.
Omowumi, I need to pick up on something, because you mentioned it briefly in the answer you gave me, and then you mentioned it now in terms of the resistance. And in looking into this, I saw that ASU, the Academic Staff Union of Universities, was one of the biggest resistance that this bill faced, I think, in 2023, or in the 2020 or 2023 iteration of it. And also was talking about the fact that universities are meant to be autonomous. They need to make their own rules and regulations. There should not be a national law or something addressing this. But one, has ASU ever really effectively attempted to even address the issue of sexual harassment on campuses? And then secondly, have you heard from ASU now, again, when this bill is now at this stage where it is, before things start to really gear up?
Yeah, so for some of our engagements, we've engaged ASU, we've invited them to some of our engagements in terms of addressing sexual harassment generally. And ASU is not the only union. There are other unions on campus. We have FANU, we even have the students, union. We have NIFAN, which is the union of female students. We have NANS. So for all those unions, they've been consulted, they've been involved in this process. And I guess the problem initially also is that we diverse, learning experiences from the bits of infrastructure and instructional content. Whereas there is a point of convergence where learning experiences are shaped by people's safety or learner safety, is the quality of instructional content, and also the infrastructural facility, which of course government is started with the responsibility of providing. And you recall that sometime last year, the student loan bill was passed into law. Because the president was really big on fostering access to education because of people's socioeconomic backgrounds and all of those. But we've also been able to establish a network, between that and having safe education transmittal spaces. Because access to education is not just in terms of the quality of instructional content. It's not just in terms of being able to afford education in terms of the cost of education, because we live in a society where the cost of education is high, but it's also not including sexual violence, when people have to drop out of school because of the experiences of sexual violence. So far, so good. We have, indication of interest and support from the unions across learning environment, and we are also confident, that they would also lend their voice in pushing for presidential assent. I recall that during the night assembly, students across campuses, about 30 campuses actually donated pens to the president in solidarity. And you'd agree with me that the pen is the most symbolic asset of a student. So when they then donate about 10,000 pens to the president to show that at a time like this, the president needed, to demonstrate his commitment towards ensuring that people have healthy, safe, and equitable access to education. But unfortunately, the assembly came to an end. That's the night assembly. And then we now came to the 10th assembly where the bill was reintroduced. And now we're at this point where, we're pushing for presidential assent.
Omowumi, thank you so much for all the answers you have been giving. Very in-depth analysis you have been making of it. Omowumi, but in your experience, let's even talk about survivors. What are the biggest barriers to justice for survivors of sexual harassment? And this bill, like many other bills that we have seen, put forward in Nigeria, always has some kind of lacuna in it. A big chasm that you are wondering, does this really address everything? Would you say that this bill addresses this issue of sexual harassment when it comes to survivors?
It does, because if you look at this bill, it addresses sexual harassment from 3 angles. The first being prevention. And if anything, I think I am really excited about the promise of this bill because it looks at it from a prevention standpoint. The second angle is from a protection standpoint. And then the third angle is from the redress mechanism standpoint. This bill imposes on institutions the obligation to ensure that victims and survivors and even bystanders are protected. And as a matter of fact, for anyone and everyone that victimizes anyone who makes a report of sexual harassment, they are also deemed a principal offender, just like the person who committed the actual offense of sexual harassment. And I said earlier on that this bill also establishes sexual harassment as both a civil wrong and a crime. So which means that survivors could explore a range of remedies. They could choose to institute a criminal proceeding, and also that even beyond the administrative sanction that may be meted out within the institution, everyone who has reported and is dissatisfied with the outcome at the institutional level has the right to request a judicial review, within 21 days of the outcome of the investigative committee. So these are ways that this bill protects survivors. And you could also request compensation depending on the remedy that you're looking for if you institute a civil proceeding on, cases of sexual harassment. So this bill protects survivors. And I think also that it also beams the light on even technology-facilitated sexual harassment, which is a pattern of sexual harassment that is, increasing by the day, in learning environment. So it's a promising piece of legislation, and we can only pray and hope that this will become an act of parliament.
I have a two-part question for you, just a twofold question, if you will. Some fear that victims may be intimidated or bribed into withdrawing their cases, and which is not unheard in Nigeria, to be honest. So how can that be prevented under the law? But most importantly, how will the bill protect students and vulnerable situations, those in rural areas or where awareness and accessibility seems to be a challenge?
So I think the bill again is clear on this, right? In fact, the bill explicitly states that for persons who facilitate, assist, or encourage the commission of this offense or try to obstruct the course of justice, they are also liable if found guilty to a jail term of up to 14 years, but not less than 5 years, without an option of fine. But as civil society organizations, I think we need to also hold higher education institutions to account to ensure that they make provision for survivor-centered mechanisms. Because the truth is that we need to address sexual harassment as a culture and climate issue. Because culture would speak to the collectively held value and shared belief in an environment. If survivors know that when they report, nothing will be done, then there is no point reporting. So we need to do a culture transformation engagement where there's a lot of conversation, a lot of sensitization, a lot of preventative education, so that survivors, learners, victims, bystanders, they are empowered enough to explore these reporting mechanisms. And on the part of the institution also, they need to demonstrate the relevant or required institutional courage to ensure that when people report cases, there is transparency in the determination of the case. And just to mention that another value proposition of this bill is that it provides data and oversight, because institutions are then mandated on an annual basis to come up with a report. It could be a non-identifying, aggregation of cases that have been reported without disclosing the identity of the victim. But learners across the institution and even other educators need to be aware that cases were reported, and out of the cases that were reported, such a number of cases were investigated, and these are the outcome of those cases, because those are the ways that we can also build confidence and trust in the institution, that when cases are reported, the cases will be taken seriously, the complaints will be taken seriously, and that sanctions will be meted out to perpetrators on a need and on a case basis.
All right, Mommy, thank you so much so far being with us on Jasiri. We'll take a quick short break, but we'll be right back before you know it. This is Jasiri on News Central. We'll be right back.
I want to go sleep.
As we are getting connection back with our guests, I think it's a conversation we can touch on very quickly, because sexual harassment in schools is rife. We all remember it wasn't controversial, it was the reactions that were more controversial, the Sex for Grades documentary. And it took a while, but in the last 5 years, you see just a bit more an uptick in the number of lecturers who are being investigated or then dismissed. And one of the next questions I wanted us to ask Omowumi has to do with outside of the university premises. You have to still involve the justice system, you have to involve the police. But I hear that Omowumi is back. So Kat, let's pick up from that, because we don't have a lot of time anymore. Omowumi, thank you so much for joining us. All right, let's continue.
All right, so Mommy, so the Independent, what we were talking about before you joined us again in the final lap of the conversation, was that we're looking at the Independent Sexual Harassment Committees. They are one thing, but there's also the police response, there are the court delays. Does this bill address this aspect of the conversation? For example, do we need more special courts? Do we need more training for the police? What about the factors outside of school?
So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Right. So the bill, the anti-sexual harassment bill also the scope of the bill extends to patterns of sexual violence that happens outside school, as long as, it's perpetrated by persons that are bound, by the bill itself. So it speaks to persons who are even seeking admission into the higher education, environment. It speaks to vendors. It speaks to portals. So it does not necessarily have to happen within the school environment, as long as you can situate it within the context of the relationship, with an educator, either someone who has, a part-time or full-time academic or non-academic supervision or training or advice over the student. So the location does not really matter. What really matters is the context, of the relationship.
I know that a lot of people watching will be asking, why is this bill focusing just on tertiary institutions? You touched on it earlier on, but I think it's something we need to sort of emphasize before we wrap things up, because we know that harassment happens everywhere in Nigeria, in secondary schools, on the streets, at home, in churches, mosques, and other places of religious worship. So why limit this bill to just a specific place or connection to a specific place? Very quickly, Omowumi.
So it's because we do not have a legal framework that addresses, you know, the spectrum, the entire spectrum of sexual harassment in educational spaces. And I think one of the variations that has happened to this bill is that the name has now been expanded to the educational institutions and not just tertiary institutions. So we have the VAP Act, you know, that addresses sexual and gender-based violence across Nigeria. We have the ICPC Act that addresses abuse of power, that addresses sexual harassment from the lens of abuse of power. So which means that the currency of exchange has to be sex if you're instituting, you know, action under the ICPC Act. And that would fall under the typology of sexual harassment that is quid pro quo, which means that patterns of sexual harassment that falls under hostile environments aren't covered by the ICPC Act. We have the criminal law of Lagos that also has just one section, you know, dedicated to sexual harassment. Ditto for the VAP Act, you know, just one section dedicated to sexual harassment. So these are legal frameworks that are limited in terms of scope, in terms of, you know, territorial or geographical application. So it became imperative to have this piece of legislation that addresses the broad spectrum of sexual harassment, that factors in the power dynamics and the context of learning environment.
Very interesting conversation. But we need to move to this particular one. What are the next steps in the life of this bill for us to see it land on the table of the president, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu's desk for his assent? What gives you hope that this time, this change that we are all excited about, talking about, would eventually come and it will stick and stay?
And stay.
So the next step is for us to all lend our voices. I'm glad that this conversation is happening. You also have a role to play as media people to dim the lights on this conversation and to demand, you know, presidential assent. As civil society organizations, we are also all coming together to advocate for the assent to this bill. And we're engaging critical stakeholders. One thing that is happening also is that we're constantly mapping the stakeholders who can throw their weight around this bill. And the student community is not left out. We're confident that the president will demonstrate the required commitment and assent this bill. Because by every means possible, we need to stem the tide of sexual harassment, which has assumed an epidemic proportion. That 70% out of female undergraduates experience sexual harassment. I don't think that the president would withhold his assent to this bill, because by every means possible, we need to ensure that our learning environments are becoming spaces where we're nurturing potentials and not breeding victims of sexual and gender-based violence.
Omowumi Ogunrotimi, thank you so much for your time today, and you've really taken your time to break down the details of this bill. And you have our support from here on Jasiri. Every opportunity and everything we can do to push the needle forward in this conversation, we will do it. Thank you so much for joining us. All right, that last bit of data she dropped, 70% of female students in tertiary institutions have experienced some form of sexual harassment. Ladies, I'm going to put you on the spot very quickly as we go. By a show of hands, when you were in university, did you experience sexual harassment? I said by show of hands. I didn't ask for anything. I didn't say facial features, just by show of hands.
Why are you looking at me?
No, I'm not looking. I'm just saying. Okay, so of course. So it's 3 out of 4. We'll leave it at that. Now, today's conversation reminds us that laws alone don't change societies. People do. The Sexual Harassment of Students bill is a necessary step, a long overdue statement that the classroom must never be a place of fear or exploitation. But legislation is only the beginning. For real change, we need courage. The courage of students speaking out, the courage of institutions to act, and the courage of society to listen and believe. Because every case of harassment is not just a scandal. It's a story of broken trust between a teacher and a student, between school and child, and between a nation and its future. Let's keep our eyes on this one. Let's lend our voices to it, and let's make sure it lands on President Bola Tinubu's desk and he signs. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you tomorrow.